Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, I have for you guys a busy episode, more preseason reactions. I'm going to be naming some players that I think are overperforming in the sense that, I'm excited about them. They've been playing really well. And then I'm going to be talking about some players I think are underperforming in the sense that I'd want to see a little bit more out of them. I also got some injury news to discuss, unfortunately, as you guys may know, but should be a busy episode. The St. Louis Blues play hockey in 10 days from this time of recording, so we are so close. Anyway, it should be a fun episode. Make sure you stay tuned.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily blues content. I'm your host, Josh Hyman. As always, if this is your first time here, welcome to the show. Please follow or subscribe, whatever podcast platform you're listening to me on. I upload these episodes all the time. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. We're getting close to 500 subscribers. If you are coming back here, not for the first time, thanks for coming back. Thanks for making Locked On Blues your first listen. Appreciate all you guys. Support's been good throughout the offseason, but man, am I so excited to get into this regular season that is starting right around the corner. Like I said, 10 days. I think there's NHL regular season games in 2 days in London, and then the actual regular season or the full regular season starts the 11th, so less than a week now, but the Blues get screwed over and play way late, like 4 days after the rest of the league starts, so we got to be a little bit more patient over here, but that's all right. So a lot of news to get into today. Like I said, I'm talking about players that I'm high on during preseason, players that I'm a little bit disappointed with, and then of course we have the injury news to talk about as well. So those are the three segments. I'm going to start with the bad news, the injury news, just get it out of the way early. One injury that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet is the Marco Scandella injury. It was announced, I believe, late September, so about a week or so ago, that Marco Scandella was to undergo surgery and would be out for, 4 months? I think he's slated to come back around March. So Marco Scandella will be out of the lineup for a good while. And that opens up play for other defenders, which was good for a guy named Scott Perunovich until, the other unfortunate news. So we'll get into that in a second here. But I saw a lot of people on social media and stuff like celebrating the Scandella injury. Not celebrating it, but like kind of being very optimistic about it in the sense that he's a bad defenseman and, his spot will better be filled by someone else. And I agree to an extent that maybe it's a blessing in disguise that whatever defenseman you insert into the lineup for Marco Scandella has a decent chance of playing better than Marco Scandella. But at the end of the day, you are losing a close to every night player for a long period of time. And whether or not you love him as a player, it still is a fact that you're just down a body now for a long period of time. And the Blues defense isn't exactly thin, but it's a little bit of a liability in the sense that they don't have the top end talent that can just eat minutes. And it would have been nice to have a guy like Scandella, especially at the beginning of the regular season, to just eat some third pairing minutes, make it a little bit easier on Justin Fall, Colton Parayko, those guys. But now with his injury, guys are going to have to step up, and with Perunovich's injury, like I said, it just thins that pool even more. So as much as it's like if you had to pick a defenseman on the roster that you could live without, Marco Scandella would be near the top of that list. However, I'd prefer to have him healthy. He's on the roster. You make do with the players that you have, and I'd rather have him available, in a case of emergency or matchup wise, than not have him available at all. It's just going to make things even more difficult for the Blues, especially if the defense starts to struggle. They don't have as much freedom, swapping guys in and out like they did last year and, trying to figure out what works. But it does give opportunities for guys like Nico Mikkola to step up, even Matt Kessel, who's looked all right in preseason. I would want a little bit more out of him, but, they have some guys that are relatively unproven that are going to get more of a chance now. It's just a matter of you gotta trust those guys, and that's something that Craig Berube has definitely a short leash on is rookie players. He doesn't play them a whole lot, and the leash is short, like I said. So They're going to have a lot to prove, and it's unfortunate, The one thing that does bring up is I'm not sure if they have. I might have missed it. If they move Scandella to long-term injury reserve, free up a little bit of cap space, and then bring in a defenseman that way, who knows? So it does open up a little bit of financial freedom, and as we know, the Blues are pretty close to the cap, so making a move would be difficult, without sending money out, but the Scandella injury might make that a little bit easier depending on how they treat that contract. And now the other injury that I unfortunately have to talk about is Scott Perunovich. Man, I'm just so bummed. He's a guy that I've been really high on for a while. I think he can be a big impact player for the St. Louis Blues. I think he has an opportunity to turn into a really, really valuable defenseman. I think this year was going to be somewhat of a breakout year for him. The Blues trusting him a little bit more at 5v5, giving him that power play 2 time, chance to rack up a lot of points, play a full regular season. In the lineup every night sort of guy. He played 19 games last year, and he looks pretty darn good in them. And we haven't really seen a whole lot out of Scott Perunovich because he's dealt with injuries in the past. He had a torn labrum, and he also had wrist surgery both in his left arm. And this year was looking really good for him. He's getting a little bit older. He really wants to prove himself. The team seems really high on him. The front office seems really high on him. It really felt like this year was his opportunity to break out, like I said, and I expected him to break out. I talked so highly of him in the weeks leading up to the season and all the crossover episodes I did. He was a guy that I continuously mentioned in terms of he could really make an impact for the St. Louis Blues this year. And we have these forwards, Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas, that we're going to, hand the keys over to next season and forward as the future. And the Blues defense doesn't really have a future as much as that. And Scott Perunovich was the guy that I was looking to, as sort of next up. And now news comes out that his injury that he suffered in the preseason game is pretty much worst case scenario. He fractured his shoulder and is going to be out for the season. Same arm that he has hurt previously, but the team says that it is not related to his previous injuries. I know that Perunovich had said that has called his previous 2 injuries just a fluke. He had never been injured his whole career up until coming to the St. Louis Blues, and even though the 2 injuries were on the same arm and were long term, he himself believes that it's just pure coincidence. I hope that is the case. And it's a good thing that it wasn't a re-aggravation of a previous injury in that arm, which I hope means that he's not just injury prone and will never play hockey. And it just is a case of really, 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 really unfortunate luck. But, it's hard to be optimistic when this is yet another long-term injury for Scott Perunovich. And, it really feels like it could turn into one of those what-ifs with him. But I think if, like he said, these injuries aren't related and it's just a fluke, I still have faith that he can come in and make an impact whenever he is healthy. I don't think that this is a matter of, he's, his chance with the Blues is gone. I still think he has a role with his team when he is healthy, and I'm excited to see him play, but definitely going to need to, chew over this injury and I've reached out to some people on Twitter that know a little bit more than I do in terms of whether this could be a lingering thing or a long-term thing. So stay tuned for that in future episodes. If you're curious like myself of is this going to plague him for the rest of his career. So I do have some plans in the future talking about that, future episodes, but I'm waiting to get a little bit more knowledge first before I delve into that. That being said, though, I do want to get into some, I guess, not as happy thoughts, because I'm going to start with the players that I'm a little disappointed in. But I want to get into some more relevant, positive talks, and that is about the St. Louis Blues playing hockey. They've got a couple preseason games under their belt now, and they've looked really, really good for the most part. So I'm going to start by talking about some players that I want to see a little bit more from, and then I'm going to close the episode talking about some of the players that I have seen a lot of good things from and that I'm really excited to see in the upcoming regular season. But before I get into any of that, I want to tell you guys about our good friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sporting wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, NHL, MMA, boxing, and even golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online where the game starts, and I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. All right, so the Blues have been playing some hockey games lately, and I've been paying attention. I've been tuning in, and I've got a couple thoughts. I'm going to start this segment too by talking about some players that I'm a little bit underwhelmed with, and I'm saying that nicely because it's preseason, and as much as I'm going to say, when I in the following segment, as much as I say, these players are playing great, but take it with a grain of salt. It's preseason. It's the same thing about players playing poorly, except for one player. One player I think is really muffing his possible last chance with the St. Louis Blues. But I'm going to start by with a little bit of a hot take, and it's more of a selfish hot take rather than something I'm concerned about. And that is two of the players that I want to see a little bit more of that I've been disappointed in are Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou. The new big payday guys, the new future faces of the St. Louis Blues have not really done a whole lot in the preseason. And when I say that this is a selfish hot take, it's because I'm not concerned. They're Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou. They've still looked really good out there. The only area where they've kind of been lacking is the stat sheet, and that'll come. They've looked good, like I said. They've looked dynamic. They've looked deserving of the extension, at least from if you remove goals and assists and those things, they've looked like good hockey players. But you also would love to see them racking up goals and assists now that they got the monkey off their back of the contract extension and that sort of thing. And we haven't quite seen that yet. For those of you that are listening to this and freaking out, how the heck are you bashing on Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou? Go back and listen to any of the last 10, 15 episodes. I am over the moon with both of them. Could not be happier to have the keys of the franchise being handed to them this year, next year, whatever. So this isn't a long-term thing. I'm not worried that the contracts were a mistake or worried that they're not going to produce in the regular season. It's purely a selfish hot take. They just got paid. I want to watch them. I want to watch them score goals. I want to watch them get assists. I want to watch them, make highlight reels. And yeah, it's preseason, nothing special, but I'm impatient. Now, if this trend were to continue into the regular season, that's a different conversation. But I have no reason to believe that it will. And they've also only played 4 games, something like that. So even then, 4 game slumps happen all the time, and it's not even a slump. I'm pretty sure they both have at least 1 assist. So it's really just me being, like I said, a little picky, a little petty with that. But one player I do want to talk about that I actually am, I'm not concerned is the right word, but accepted that this player may never be who we hoped he would be, and that is Klim Kostin. I talked a lot about how this, heading into the preseason and heading into training camp and all that I thought that this could be Klim Kostin's last real shot to prove himself with the St. Louis Blues. He's had time and time again. He's had opportunities. He's had a lot of ice time in the AHL, and he hasn't really had a ton of success there either. He's really more turned into a grinder guy that gets a lot of penalty minutes and can kind of spark some energy, but that wasn't what he was drafted for. That wasn't what we hoped he would turn into. And I think it's just been a little disappointing watching his career arc up until this point. And I thought that this preseason, he's getting some good ice time. He's really getting a good focus, from the team. I thought this was the year that he could really prove himself. And the negatives that I have seen in Klim Kostin in the past have not gone away. And those aren't things that I think are going to, those aren't things that I think you can really work out. And the biggest thing for me is his effort. He just kind of seems lazy out there. He seems like when he's engaged, he can be really, really good, but he can kind of just disappear out there, kind of a much more dramatic version of Vladimir Tarasenko, because at least, when Vladimir Tarasenko is engaged, he's a top 5 goal scorer in the league. But, Klim Kostin, you can't really afford to take shifts off because you're not a dynamic goal scorer who can put up 40 a year on a good year. You're a third liner who's just fighting for his spot, and he has shown flashes. He has looked really good at times and has gotten me excited that there is a place for him on this team, not just short term but long term as well. But overall, I just see a lot of unengaged play from him, and that's kind of why those penalty minutes rack up, is that he can be a little bit dumb out there with those penalties. Lack of effort can lead to penalties. Rather than getting your body in front of a guy, he's kind of just reaches a stick out sometimes, and it's just one of those things where it's frustrating because you really feel like he could be playing better than he is. I also do think that he just isn't quite as skilled as the Blues maybe thought he was. But overall, I think it's. I don't want to have this sound like, oh, if he tried harder, he'd be on the team, because it's more nuanced than that. It's more complicated than that. There are just players like that in all sports that don't have as high of a motor. High motor guys like LeBron James or Connor McDavid are going to be full 100% every single time they're on the ice. But then there are other guys like Vladimir Tarasenko or heck, even Alexander Ovechkin, who don't have as high of a motor, but that doesn't mean they're bad. They can still be very, very valuable because when their motor's on, they're good like nobody else. So Klim Kostin might just suffer from that same aspect where he doesn't have that high of a motor. He's just not as fully engaged as often as some other players, and he doesn't have the skill set or the ability to make up for that. So that being said, I don't want to spend the whole episode bashing on players and complaining about injuries. I do want to get into some positives, some players that I've been really, really, really impressed with. Make sure you stay tuned for that. That'll be the whole third segment. Be right back. See, if you're not on the YouTube, you're not watching this on YouTube, you just missed a little cat break during that ad break. I got 2 cats laying on the bed, and if you want to check them out and you're listening to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, whatever, go to the YouTube channel. You're missing out on great content. Getting close to 500 subscribers, like I said, so every ounce of support helps. Joking aside. Anyways, let's get into some positives. I spent a lot of this episode complaining and being a downer and talking about injuries and players that I'm not impressed with, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about some players that I'm so impressed with. The first guy is Jake Neighbors. I feel like I've been talking about Jake Neighbors for years now on this podcast because I have. But he is proving me right in front of our very eyes. He has, I don't know, this might be a little bit of a scorcher. He has been close to the Blues' best player at times in the preseason. He has been so darn good out there, and he has the stats to show. I think he's up to like 4 or 5 goals, a bunch of assists, and his line as a whole has just looked really, really good in terms of puck possession and scoring chances. And he looks like he can hang with NHLers. He's been playing with some good line mates. They haven't just been sticking him down there on the third line, which is where I think he would end up at least to start the regular season. But when he's been out there with first liners or second liners, he's looked like he belongs out there, and he looks like he can keep up with them, and he's not the weak link. I think Craig Berube was asked today, or it was Doug Armstrong, I think it was Berube, is the play of Jake Neighbors making it hard for you to not give him a roster spot? And Berube said absolutely. It would be unfortunate, if he had to start on the fourth line and we didn't really see as much dynamic play out of him as we've been seeing in the preseason, but we know in Berube's system that you got to earn his trust and you got to sort of work your way up. So Jake Neighbors starting the year on the fourth line could very well mean that he could be up on the second line or even the first line at times in the regular season. The Blues run their top 3, even sometimes their fourth line, if they have the opportunity to, they run them close to even. The year the Blues won the Cup, their fourth line produced a lot of offense. So Jake Neighbors being on the fourth line couldn't necessarily indicate that it's a traditional, he's going to get 6 or 7 minutes a night and barely play. He could get power play time. That fourth line could, get 10 plus minutes depending on the night. I just want him to make the roster. I want to see him play, full 82-game season, knock on wood, with the St. Louis Blues, and he's doing everything in his power to get himself to that point, and I would be shocked if he didn't make the opening night roster at this point, if he wasn't, one of the 12 forwards suiting up for the St. Louis Blues, or 11 if they go 7 defensemen, because who knows. Jake Neighbors, absolutely dynamic out there. Like I said, at times been the best player on the ice. There was also that one play where he lost his stick and used his feet to take the puck from his own blue line all the way down to the other end. He dumped it in without a stick and also took like 30 seconds off the clock. It was amazing. Love the kid. He's dark horse for Calder. I've been saying that, and if he starts in the fourth line, there's some really good talent that he's competing against, so maybe not. But hey, it's a biased take for sure, but keep an eye on Jake Neighbors, man. He's gonna be good, and this year is going to be his rookie year. I'm feeling it. He's earned a spot. A couple other guys that I've been really high on. Another one is Pavel Buchnevich. He's been great. He's got himself a couple goals. He's been really, really engaged. He looks comfortable. He's got a full year under his belt with the Blues, and he was one of their best players last year, and he really looks like he's more comfortable and more driven and more ready to go this year. Excuse me. But yeah, he looks like he is going to be a workhorse for the Blues this year, as he was last year. Did a really good job of staying healthy last year. Again, knock on wood. And that's something that's going to be very valuable for a team with this much depth. If you could stay healthy for 82 games, he has an opportunity to put up a ton of points. And I think he's proven himself in this regular season that he has taken another step with this team and gotten more comfortable and fit in even more. Another, I guess not player I want to talk about. I want to talk about the defense as a whole. The defense was something that I think a lot of us have been worried about heading into this season. It didn't really feel like the Blues did enough to address the defensive woes in the offseason. All they really did was re-sign Nick Leddy. The defense is the exact same as it was last year, and the defense last year at times was underwhelming. And Nick Leddy, apart from a few games here or there, has been a net positive player for the St. Louis Blues. So like at the end of the day, their defense is what it is. But still, heading into the preseason and the regular season, the beginning of the year is going to be a big test to see can the defense hang, because the defense was atrocious at the beginning of the year last year. And even though you say preseason doesn't count, that's something that showed in preseason. It was like if you watched a preseason Blues game last year, you'd be like, man, the defense doesn't look that good, does it? And it was one of those things you'd be like, it'll iron itself out by the regular season, and then it didn't. So as much as you don't want to take a whole lot away from preseason, you hope the defense looks good, and so far they have. They haven't looked great. There's definitely been times when I've gotten flashbacks to last year and be like, oh boy, it's gonna be tough. But they've looked pretty good. They've looked a lot better than they looked at the beginning of the year last year, and during the preseason last year. And honestly, that's really all you can ask for, because the Blues were still winning games last year. Their offense was still dynamic last year and will be incredibly dynamic this year. They have a ton of scoring punch. All the defense really needs to do is just be decent. Like I said, if the Blues defense plays elite, this team is a juggernaut. Up there with Tampa Bay and Colorado. And that's not an exaggeration. If the Blues, through luck or a new player, have an elite defense like they had in 2019, whether like that be, like I said, if the defense that's on the roster just steps it up, Colton Parayko returns to form, et cetera, or they somehow go out and trade for someone at the deadline or next season, whatever, this team would be a top 3 team in the NHL. I can say that with full confidence. It's just right now they're about a tier below that because the defense is just above average and not really good. But you don't always need to be an elite juggernaut to win a Stanley Cup. I don't remember where I saw it, but I saw a post where writers or whatever voted on the most overrated and underrated teams heading into next season, and the St. Louis Blues were voted as one of the most underrated teams in the NHL, and honestly, I could get behind that. I think them and Calgary are 2 teams that are really going to surprise a lot of people this year, and I don't know why the Blues would surprise a lot of people, because they won a ton of games last year, and they took Colorado to 6 games, and almost took them to 6 games, I should say. No, did take them to 6 games. I can't do math. They almost took them to 7 games. Yeah, long day. Almost took them to 7 games, but they took them to 6, and that's something that only one other team in the NHL did, and that was the Tampa Bay Lightning. So don't sleep on the Blues this year. I think the defense looked really, really good. But the one X factor that I'm really happy with for the Blues is Jordan Binnington. Binnington hasn't had a ton of playing time. It's been limited. I think we've had pretty much 1 full game to watch from him, 3 periods or so. But when he's been out there, he's looked really good. He's looked steady. I think he's only given up like 2 goals so far. And he's made some big saves. And when he's been out there, the team looks confident. I think that's one of the biggest things is the team plays differently in front of different goalies. And the team is playing confident. The defense is playing confident in front of Jordan Binnington. And when the team plays confident in front of him, he'll play confident behind them. So overall, I'm thrilled with the way this preseason has gone. They did suffer 1 tough loss, but it's going to happen. It's hockey. It wasn't quite as much as a blowout as the scoreboard indicated. I think it was 5-2. They had a tough first period in that game. They went down 2-0, but after that, they hung around as much as they could. So overall, been a great preseason. I just can't wait for hockey to start. 10 more days until Blues hockey, but we got regular season starting soon. So that being said, that is all the time I have for you today. I wanted to thank you all so much for tuning in and listening or watching. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to me on, and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On Blues. You can follow Locked On Blues on all of our various social accounts, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok at Locked On Blues. When you're done with this show, go check out Locked On NHL. There's tons more preseason games going on, tons more news. Check that show out. It's got so much information there. I listen to it myself sometimes to get in touch with what's going on in the league, especially a time like this where there's so much news happening. So definitely check that show out. That being said, though, like I said, thank you all so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.